Hey y'all, welcome back for chapter 5 of Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. So, chapter 5 is Racial Identity and Adulthood, still a work in progress. And I am really excited about this chapter, but there's even more good things to come. Chapter 6. I think I highlighted nearly the entire chapter, so I can't wait to go over that with you guys tomorrow. Thanks for being patient with me. I took yesterday off just to kind of rest and recharge, so I was grateful to have that little bit of time. So let's get started. She starts off by talking about college and her experience in college and how she started to explore more of her racial identity in college because she had grown up in a predominantly white area and school system. So she goes on to talk about how a lot of times in high school and that adolescent phase, there'll be that kind of anger that we talked about in the previous chapters and almost like a rebellion. But then once you get more immersed, you're just not really thinking about white people in general. And she talks about how she didn't actually remember the names of any of the white people that she knew in these groups at school, just because that was irrelevant to her. She was really focused on her Black identity and being immersed with those people. And she says, and I love this so much. She says, sometimes I find it helpful to compare this growth process to learning another language. The best way to learn a second language is to travel to a place where it is spoken and experience complete immersion. Once you have achieved the level of proficiency you need, you can leave. If you worked hard to become conversant, you will of course take pride in your accomplishment and will not want to spend time with people who disparage your commitment to this endeavor. You may choose not to speak this new language all the time, but if you want to maintain your skill, you will need to speak it often with others who understand it. And I really liked this and the growth process, especially thinking of anti-racism work for white people and like recognizing whiteness. And the best way to learn that is to become immersed in learning and listening to Black people. And I've talked about this in so many videos before, but the first thing that I started doing when I started getting more involved with anti-racism work is I simply went into TikTok lives of Black people and listened and didn't say anything in the comments, but enter those spaces and just listen, because I had also grown up primarily around white people. And so you don't learn if you are not immersed in that. So you're not going to learn another language if you're not listening to people speak that language. And it's kind of the same concept that she talks about with identity and anti-racism work in general. So I really liked that analogy a lot. And then she talks about life being stressful for Black students and other students of color on predominantly white campuses. She says that it shouldn't come as a surprise, but it often does, especially for white people. Whether it is the loneliness of being routinely overlooked as a lab partner in science courses, the irritation of being continually asked by curious classmates about Black hairstyles, the discomfort of being singled out by a professor to give the Black perspective in class discussion, the pain of racist graffiti scrawled on dormitory room doors, the insult of racist jokes circulated through campus email, or the injury inflicted by racial epithets and sometimes beer bottles hurled from a passing car. Black students on predominantly white college campuses must cope with ongoing affronts to their racial identity. The desire to retreat to safe space is understandable. Sometimes that means leaving the campus altogether. And I think that really helps to put it in perspective for us white people that are reading, that we don't see things that we are not experiencing. So in our minds, it's frequent that we underestimate the presence of racism and even overt racism that is occurring. It's not happening to us. We don't notice it. And so to us, it's just like, oh, well, I think that that's not really an issue anymore. And the Black people that are experiencing this on campuses that are predominantly white, it is very frequent and very real. And so it just kind of puts it into perspective to read about some of those experiences that otherwise we may not notice or hear about. And the more involved I get in anti-racism work, and the more I read about, the more I notice things in everyday life, in TV shows, in talking with my peers or family members, in performances, like going to dance shows. Like, you just start to see it everywhere. And it's not because it wasn't there before, it's because you are now aware and you've noticed it. She talks about how stressful experiences can happen at any college, and social conflicts can and do erupt among Black students at Black colleges. But she says there is considerable evidence that Black students at historically Black colleges and universities achieve higher academic performance, enjoy greater social involvement, and aspire to higher occupational goals than their peers do at predominantly white institutions. For example, according to data from the National Science Foundation, Spelman College, a historically Black college for women, sends more Black women on to earn PhDs in the sciences than any other undergraduate institution. Found that very interesting. And I know some people have asked for more statistics, and those are provided throughout this book. She uses the acronyms. Yeah, I think they're called acronyms in here that I'll put in the definitions. But I underlined HBCUs as historically Black colleges and universities, and PWIs as predominantly white institutions. And when I looked it up, historically Black colleges and universities are those that were founded before 1964, and the primary mission was educating Black Americans. Predominantly white institutions was those where the student body was more than 50% white. And then she talks about how it's not just for college students, that even those that do not go to college, they will also have this identity exploration after a period of seeing their racial identity brought into focus for them. She also talks about the Nation of Islam and how it continues to appeal to some urban Black youth, many of whom are not in college, because it offers another expanded positive definition of what it means to be Black. She says, in particular, the clean-shaven, well-groomed representatives of the nation who can be seen on city streets and Black neighborhoods, emphasizing personal responsibility and Black community development, offer a compelling contrast to the pervasive stereotypes of Black men. And that was really interesting to me, because I have known many Black people that do practice Islam, and I never thought about it in terms of that community and that presence before I read this. Then she goes on to talk about the cycles of racial, ethnic, cultural identity development, which we talked about last time as the REC identity. And she says during middle adulthood, and she defines that as between the mid-30s and the mid-50s, which made me feel slightly uncomfortable, but it's fine, I'll be fine. She says that adults at midlife fluctuate between periods of stability and transition as they re-examine previous life decisions and commitments and choose to make minor or major changes in their lives. She says the middle adulthood period of life may be the most difficult time to struggle with racial identity because of one's increased responsibilities and increased potential for opportunities. So she talks about how some Black adults may have consciously chosen to kind of adapt to more white norms, whether that be so that they could have more opportunities for a promotion or for some other reason. And she says, if an individual's sense of affirmation is sought through contact with and validation from whites, then the struggle with one's racial identity is imminent. And I thought that this was really important just to give us a better understanding, potentially, of the Black experience, especially in work. She says, survival stress is described by another father I interviewed who was worried not about promotions, but about simply holding on to what he had already achieved. Just being Black makes it hard because people look at you like you're not as good as they are, like you're a second-class citizen, something like that. You got to always look over your shoulder like somebody's always watching you. At my job, I'm the only Black in my department, and it seems like they're always watching me. The pressure's always on to perform. You feel like if you miss a day, you might not have a job. So there's that constant awareness on my part. They can snatch what little you have. So that's a constant fear, you know, especially when you have a family to support. So I'm always aware of what can happen. She goes on to say that on the job, Black people may be open advocates of institutional change, or because of survival concerns, they may feel constrained in how they express their anger. One male interviewee working in a human service agency fluctuated between being silent and speaking up. He said, it's very difficult, and dealing with all the negative problems and then going back and fighting the administration of the department that you're working in and fighting the racism and squabbling of white males as well as white females. It's really difficult, and one becomes programmed to be a little bit hard. But then in order to survive, you've got to control it. And generally, I stay pretty much out of trouble. It's just like playing a game in order to survive. And I think it's really important that we hear those experiences. Like, we go to work every day and like, what's our biggest problem? What we're going to have for lunch, or whether we are really tired and want to take a nap, and we're not going through this constant like survival instinct. I can only think that it must be absolutely exhausting. Like, no wonder Black people would like to rest right now for multiple reasons. She says that adults who have achieved a positive sense of REC identity are likely to be proactively race conscious about their children's socialization experiences, often choosing to live in a Black community. If the demographics of their geographic area do not permit such a choice, they will, in contrast to raceless parents, actively seek out Black playmates for their children wherever they can find them. One mother explained, quote, "I'm not opposed to my child interacting with white children or kids of any other race, but I want them to have a Black peer group just for the sense of commonality and sharing some of the same experiences and just not losing that identity of themselves," quote. And we do see that a lot, and it's very important for children to have friends that are going through the same experiences and that will go through the same experiences that they do. She says the process of re-examining racial identity can continue even into late adulthood. According to Erickson, the challenge of one's later years is to be able to reflect on one's life with a sense of integrity rather than despair. She says the work of internalization does not stop with the resolution of conflicts surrounding racial or cultural identity. We continue to be works in progress for a lifetime. Yes, no notes. The next section is the corporate cafeteria, which was my favorite in this chapter. She starts off this section by saying, "When I told my sister I was writing a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?, she said, 'Good, then maybe people will stop asking me about it.'" And then my sister spends her time not at a high school or college campus, but in a corporate office. Even in corporate cafeterias, Black men and women are sitting together, and for the same reason. As we have seen, even mature adults sometimes need to connect with someone who looks like them and who shares the same experiences. She talks about A Tale of O, which is by psychologist Rosabeth Moss Cantor. This is about what happens to the O, the token, in a world of X's. And she says that in corporate America, Black people are still in the O position. One consequence of being an O is heightened visibility. When an O walks in the room, the X's notice. Whatever the O does, positive or negative, stands out because of this increased visibility. It is hard for an O to blend in. When several O's are together, the attention of the X's is really captured. Without the tokens present in the room, the X's go about their business, perhaps not even noticing that they are all X's. But when the O walks in, the X's are suddenly self-conscious about their Xness. That's so true. She says, when the Black people are sitting together, the white people notice and become self-conscious about being white in a way that they were not before. In part, the question reflects that self-consciousness. What does it say about the white people if the Black people are all sitting together? A white person may wonder, am I being excluded? Are they talking about me? Are my own racial stereotypes and perhaps racial fears being stimulated? And I put that as a journal prompt because I really think it's important for all of us to reflect back at times where we have been in work environments or wherever else that you can think of. And you walk into a room and there's, either Black people sitting at a table or congregating in another way, and what that brought up in you. Like, I think for me, I don't know. It's something to journal about for sure. I definitely felt a tinge of discomfort in the past when I've been in those situations. And this is before I started any kind of deconstruction or anti-racism learning and work. And I don't know that I really thought I was being excluded necessarily, but I was very aware that I was probably not invited, like I wasn't a part of that group. Which is similar to what she's talking about in corporate America and the X's and O's, which is the heightened visibility. So like if I walked into a room that was full of white people, I would not have the same feelings. I would not think the same things. I would not be self-conscious or uncomfortable in the same way. Which furthers the point that people that say that they are colorblind, that's false, objectively. I mean, maybe they are actually colorblind, but to the issue of race, no, you're not, respectfully. So she talks about how she was giving a speech at an annual meeting of a national organization committed to social justice. She says all of the managers from around the country were there, and just before she was introduced, a Black man made an announcement that there would be a breakfast meeting the next day for all interested people of color in the organization. The national organization had a long history, but it was the first time people of color were going to have a caucus meeting. She said, following the announcement, I was introduced and I gave my talk entitled Interrupting the Cycle of Oppression. After a warm round of applause, I asked if there were any questions. Immediately Immediately, a visibly agitated white woman stood up and asked, "How would you feel if just before you began speaking, a white person had stood up and said there would be a breakfast meeting of all the white people tomorrow?" I replied, "I would say it was a good idea." What I meant by my response is the subject of the next chapter. And let me tell you, I already read chapter 6, which goes into part 3, which is understanding whiteness in a white context. And arguably, for us as white people, this will be one of the most important sections of this book. And like I said before, I think I highlighted almost the entire chapter, and it's a little long. So this video will be a little quicker. But the video for Friday may be a little bit longer, so I might release it a little bit later in the day. So many things to talk about with that. And this chapter was great too, and really brought to mind just more identity topics and just exploring like our thought processes and our actions, and that those weren't just random or unique or because of like our personality type. They were rooted in something specific, which is systemic racism and white supremacy. And like gaining that knowledge and awareness is definitely the first step. And I have just found this book so helpful so far. And especially, I can't wait to cover chapter 6 with you guys. I think that you are also going to get so much out of it. It really confronts that sometimes discomfort or like white guilt that you feel when you start deconstructing, and starts to give a more hopeful solutions-based approach. Not that any of the feelings are wrong or that you shouldn't feel that way. It's all a process of us seeing our identity. But I was really interested in how I can do more to not be ashamed of my whiteness, but be productive with it. How me as a white woman can be a positive influence on my white peers and a positive aspect of society. And I've been doing this for a while, and I still have not really, like, I don't have an answer for that. So after reading the next chapter in the book, I feel closer to that answer. In chapter 6, like, is the development of white identity. And yeah, I think y'all are going to be like, what? Just as much as I was when I read it. I was like, this is too good. And I'm very excited to continue on with the book. We're almost half of the way through now. After tomorrow, we're about halfway through. So that's exciting. Although I did skip the prologue for you guys when I was going through it, just because it was kind of long. So I just started at chapter 1, but there's a really great introduction prologue that she has, and she includes that in her book discussion study by the author, by Dr. Tatum. She has like a study group. And I do want to clarify, when I put journal prompts in my comments, those are not from the official study guide. Those are specifically the things I highlighted in blue that I wanted to journal about. And so I'm sharing my highlights with you all. So just to clarify that, you can find actual discussion questions, which act as good journal prompts as well, on Dr. Tatum's website, which I'll link in the notes today, but they have legitimate. The ones that I include under my blue highlights section are just things that I was prompted to journal about, that I am now sharing with you all to like have our discussions. So I did want to clarify that. Also, please let me know in the comments wherever you're watching this, whether on YouTube or Patreon, if you can please comment and let me know whether the show notes are helpful for you or not. It is a bit time consuming for me to add those in, like all of my different highlight sections, like the powerful quotes, the journal prompts, the things for the future, definitions. But I will keep doing it if y'all are finding it helpful or if you're looking at them. But please be honest, because if people aren't really reading them or looking at them, or they're not really helpful, then I can stop and just put a quick caption and it would save me some time. But if they're helpful, I'll keep doing it, because I already highlight this way when I'm reading the book and I look up the definitions anyways. So it's just me transferring that to the notes and like typing it out. Which, like I said, I'm totally happy to do if it's helpful for you guys. But if it's not, then I could take it out. So let me know. Be honest. Honest feedback, always accepted. And yeah, I'll let y'all go. I'm just being a little rambly now, but definitely tune in Friday, tomorrow, for the next chapter, because it's so good. And if you don't have time to listen tomorrow, maybe you can listen over the weekend while you're cleaning or if you're driving somewhere. But yeah, make sure to give this a like, comment with what you think about the notes or any thoughts you have about the book, and share with any friends who you think might also benefit from these videos that we're doing. Thanks for being here and continuing on the journey with me. Okay, bye.